Hello everyone and welcome back to JAS Reviews. My name is James and on this channel I do reviews of both music and movies, along with the occasional commentary piece, so if any of that sounds interesting to you then please leave this video a like and subscribe to my channel to see more content like that. And today I'm going to be doing a movie review, this time for the movie Immaculate, starring Sydney Sweeney. So, I'll admit, 2024 is exciting for the world of movies for one particular reason. It seems like this year we are not going to be lacking for horror. In my opinion, last year in 2023, horror sort of had a bit of a weaker year that year. That's not to say that there weren't some good horror movies last year, because there definitely were, but I will say that it was not strong, or nearly as strong, I should say, as some previous years for horror, but this year seems like a bit of a pretty big resurgence for it. And one of the studios that seems to be at the forefront, especially this year, for bringing the horror on is Neon. Neon has quite a few movies coming out this year, and Immaculate happens to be one of them. I was very intrigued by this movie for one main reason. It's that it seemed like this movie wasn't really going to see the light of day for a variety of reasons, but then Sydney Sweeney stepped on as a producer for the movie and sort of advocated for it to eventually get a wide release, and that is what happens. It's sort of cool to see her in a role that seems to be a bit more out of her wheelhouse. I'm not saying that she can't do horror, because, for an example, The Voyeurs was a horror movie that she had done in the past, and it was also directed by Michael Mohan, who has directed this movie. But she is more known for these more commercial movies, like I said, so it's cool to see her expanding beyond that, and I think is going to really show her to be a more versatile actress. I was intrigued by this movie from the trailers. I appreciate that they didn't really give too much away, at least the ones I saw. I was a little unsure because this seems like maybe it could be a bit of a cliched religious horror about a nun who goes on this new faith journey in Italy, but she eventually encounters some stuff going on at the church underground that are very dark secrets, and eventually one of these dark things happens to her. So, what did we get out of the movie Immaculate? Well, let's talk about it. Now, I will say this is one of those movies that is sort of hard to talk about without talking about spoilers and talking about very plot-heavy elements, so use caution in watching this review if you are interested in seeing it, because I am going to be spoiling major plot points of the movie, especially because I don't know if later trailers revealed some of this stuff, and I am going to be talking about the ending of the movie as well. So the main crux of this movie is that Sydney Sweeney's character, Cecilia, is sort of on the run from America in regards to having a very traumatic past, and she's wanting to find a new life, and she feels like God has given her a second chance to live in a more devout way, so that is why she goes to the Italian countryside to live in this new convent as a brand new nun. But while she's there, she starts unveiling some pretty dark secrets about the place that seem to make it more darker than it actually is. Sydney Sweeney's character, Sister Cecilia, becomes pregnant via Immaculate Conception, hence the title of the movie. She is a virgin, and as far as she knows, she has never had intercourse with anyone, so she becomes pregnant via Immaculate Conception, or a miracle according to the Catholic Church, although based on the foreboding atmosphere that is built up throughout the course of the movie, we can tell that that is maybe not the case in terms of how she got with this baby, and everything about the buildup of this seems to suggest that this baby is not going to be the miracle that the Catholic Church is saying that it is. This is definitely sort of a religious horror concept you've heard of before. It's not something that is necessarily the most revolutionary out there, but a lot of horror movies can do well with the concept as long as they execute it well, and I will say for the most part that I think this movie did do a good job of executing its premise. I think it was pretty compelling for a lot of the movie, although maybe a little bit predictable. I did see where this plot was going, at least until the end, which I'll talk about in a second, but a lot of the plot beats, especially in the first part of the movie, feel like some stuff you've seen before. But at the same time, I will say that it was pretty well paced. I think a lot of that has to do with Sydney Sweeney's really good performance. I think she really delivered in this role. I find her to be a pretty good actress. I really like her in Euphoria, and I've been excited to see her in more. I will admit I haven't seen her in much beyond Euphoria, but I really did like her in this role, and I think she did a good job at taking some real risks, especially in the ending of this movie. But I think she did a good job in particular at transitioning from being sort of innocent and unsure of what this Catholic Church was like to, as she's uncovering more of the secrets, becoming more determined in leaving this place and in fighting back against it. It's a really pretty well done character arc that I think works well and ends up being pretty haunting by the time the movie is over. Now, I will say that outside of Sydney Sweeney, there aren't really any other performances that I would say are huge standouts here. And that might mainly be due to the writing of the movie doesn't really make for other characters to be super well developed. The rest of them are fairly one dimensional. I think Alvaro Morte does fine as a priest in this movie, who eventually becomes the antagonist of the movie, but he doesn't really do much to intrigue me. But once again, I really do think this was more of a showcase for Sydney Sweeney as an actor more than anyone else. Everyone else here was fine. I think probably the best sort of guest star here was Simona Tabasco as Sister Mary. I think she had the most interesting stuff going on, and it was interesting to see her sort of playing the stereotype of the rebel religious character in a way that I thought was more compelling than how I've seen this type of archetype played in other religious horror movies. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the second half of this movie, because honestly, the second half is where this movie gets a lot more interesting, in my opinion, and really starts to pick up and have some stuff that might even be seen as controversial by some, and an ending that I will admit left me with my mouth hanging open. But as I thought about it more, I wasn't sure whether I liked it or hated it. It is definitely going to be a polarizing ending. But before we talk about the very end, let's talk about the stuff that came before that. Man, this movie gets pretty gory in its ending when she is in her third trimester getting ready to have the baby. There's some pretty haunting stuff revealed about how the conception actually happened that was sort of chilling. I was pretty amazed that they went that route, but it works pretty well, and it's just framed in a way that really actually sent chills up the spine. It was definitely the most frightening part of the movie for me because of just the implications behind it were so interesting and outright just chilling to me. But then the movie gets very bloody as she goes on this journey of trying to leave the church, and she has to take down the father, and man, their final confrontation is just utterly brutal. The rest of the movie isn't like sunshine and rainbows, obviously. The rest of the movie does have a very foreboding tone. There is this shift that happens in the movie that I wasn't expecting, where it went this more violent route. And while I'm not necessarily the most huge fan of over-the-top gore, I think the way they did it in this movie worked well, and especially because you weren't necessarily expecting that turn, I think that made it feel all the more visceral and raw. Then comes the ending of the movie, which I think some people are not going to like, and I'm not even sure I entirely love because of how grim it is, but at the same time, it sort of makes sense. She does conceive the baby after escaping the priest, and we don't ever see the baby, actually, which I think was a pretty interesting choice. We don't see what the baby looks like, but we can hear its sounds. And it sounds like it may not be entirely human, or it may have some things seriously wrong with it. She sees this baby, and it's obvious that, man, it is not in a good state, so she ends up taking the baby's life with a rock. She kills the baby. And it is something that I saw coming when she was looking at the baby, because you could see this mixture of sort of pity and hatred in her eyes. Hatred for the fact that she knows how she conceived this baby now, and pity because the baby is obviously not in a good state. So it's up to you to interpret whether this act of hers is merciful or if it is vengeful. Maybe it's a little bit of both, but it's definitely going to leave a lot of people feeling conflicted. I appreciate that they didn't actually show the action happening, like we don't see the results of it or anything. She puts a rock on it and the movie ends after that, but it is certainly an impact nonetheless. And the fact that I'm still thinking about that ending does say something about the movie, I think. I think it makes it more interesting than it may have been if it didn't go that risky route. But at the same time, I do almost find the ending maybe a little bit too grim for my personal tastes. But I don't know. What do you think? Let me know in the comments because I'm still trying to decide on whether I find this ending to be fascinating or one that I just can't really vibe with. Now let's get into a couple critiques for the movie. Now I will say, in especially beginning parts, I did find this movie to be ever so slightly cliched, and like I said, it was predictable, and I could have done without some of the jump scares in the movie, especially for a movie with the tone this one was going for. It didn't feel like it needed the jump scares necessarily, and they felt like something that would happen more in a Conjuring movie than in this type of movie. But that's just my opinion, and I didn't really find any of the jump scares to be particularly well done. And like I said, there are a lot of character archetypes here that you have seen before. I think the father is your typical, he presents himself as a loving priest, but turns out to have more sinister things going on under the surface. We've seen this type of priest character over and over, and not much new is done with him. We also have the rebel nun, or the rebel religious person, who turns out is not necessarily very religious at all and calls out the religious authorities. And while, like I said, I liked the actor of this role, I just didn't really find them to be particularly interesting. And then there's, of course, the more devout religious nuns in this movie that are more meant to be creepy and sort of scary to Cecilia's character. But yeah, it's all stuff you've seen before. I think it was presented fine enough, but nothing new was done with it, so that did make parts of this movie not as interesting as they could have been. But like I said, that surprising ending part of the movie really did lift it up above what it could have been. So overall, I did enjoy Immaculate. I found it to be a pretty enjoyable horror movie and a cool way to see Sydney Sweeney taking risks in her acting, and I would like to see her do more like this in the future. So I'm going to be giving this movie a solid 3 out of 5 stars. Check this one out if you're a fan of religious horror, because I do think this one is a pretty solid entry into that, and as far as horror movies about nuns go, it is actually better than either of the nun movies in the Conjuring universe, at least for my money. That was my review of Immaculate. What were your opinions on this movie? Let me know in the comments down below. And once again, my name is James and I do reviews of both music and movies, along with the occasional commentary piece, so if any of that sounds interesting, then please leave this video a like, and subscribe to my channel to see more content like that. But until then, I will see you all in the next video.